I teach at U of L's Communication Department. Among his many talents and accolades, Dr. Anton Treuer is a professor of Ojibwe at Bemidji State University in Bemidji, Minnesota. He is the editor of the only academic journal on Ojibwe-Moan, or the Ojibwe language, with the Ashkabewis Native Journal. For 30 years, he has participated in Ojibwe-Moan revitalization projects. He serves on the governing board for the Minnesota State Historical Society and was named Guardian of Culture and Lifeways and recipient of the Pathfinder Award by the Association of Tribal Archives, Libraries, and Museums. He has worked to revitalize Ojibwe-Moan and is one of the most prolific scholars in Ojibwe. He is dedicated to preserving and revitalizing Ojibwe and has worked in Ojibwe language immersion in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Ontario. He is among a team of scholars developing a Rosetta Stone for Ojibwe. Year 1 has been completed. He serves on the board of the Wadunan Dading Ojibwe Language Immersion School on the Lac Courte Oreilles Indian Reservation, a sister reservation to my Ojibwe Nation in Wisconsin. He's authored 20 books, some of them award-winning. They include Everything You Wanted to Know About Indians But Were Afraid to Ask, The Assassination of Hole in the Day, and Ojibwe in Minnesota. In 2020, he authored the Language Warriors Manifesto, How to Keep Our Languages Alive No Matter the Odds, and in 2021, the Cultural Toolbox, Traditional Ojibwe Living in the Modern World. He's been presented with over 40 awards and fellowships from prestigious organizations, including the American Philosophical Society, the Bush Foundation, the John Simon Guggenheim Foundation, the MacArthur Foundation, the National Endowment for the Humanities, and the National Science Foundation. Dr. Treuer, you earned a BA from Princeton and a master's and PhD from the University of Minnesota. The UN General Assembly proclaimed 2022 through 2032 the International Decade of Indigenous Languages. Dr. Treuer is doing his part to help that cause. His Ojibwe name is Wagush, which means fox. Today he will lead a discussion on language and culture and explain what we lose when language is lost. Gawayako Bimadazi, he leads a good life. What may be more important is Anji Bimadazin, he changes life. Miigwech, Anton.
Oh, miigwech. Do I need this? Okay. Ni maji tado Ojibwe yan ajines mi to go dwindled munugu e pichi miigwech wendaman and enemiguan bajayan wagosh indigu minua migizi and dodem wasa wadio ishkonigan wenja bayan gazaga squaji mekag dajaganashim. English. They asked me to come and speak. They didn't say anything at all about using a foreign language like English. English is the foreign language. Comes from across the ocean, from England. I'm speaking one of the indigenous languages of the Americas, and it's always weird to me that mine's the one that sounds weird, foreign, and exotic. In fact, all of us humans have been deeply impacted by colonization, which among other things is taking one language, one religion, one culture, and using it to supplant the others. It's about erasure. And we are all deeply impacted by this, no matter what our race, cultural background, nation of origin, or what have you. Because in the effort to do that, colonization has employed a lot of violence. And violence dehumanizes all of us, no matter what side of it you're on. I'm really excited, and I'm honored to be here today. For clock management, just holler at me or start flashing signs, 10 minutes, 5, knock it off. We'll try to make some time to field your questions as well. And then when we're done, there's really no way to exhaust a conversation like this. We'll really just be starting one. So I will avail myself to you for continued discussion. I'll be around all day. We got food, and I'll be here through the evening as well with other events on different topics. In my latest book, I think a lot of us wrestle with this. Also as a manifestation of colonization, I think a lot of people are struggling with something that until, several thousand years ago, nobody really had to worry about. Questions like, who am I? Where do I belong? Switching back and forth between different cultures and ways of being. It would have been as strange to our ancestors as a bird saying, who am I? What language should I speak? But today, indeed, that's where we are. And so one thing that I think is important to share and communicate with everybody is that you are a complete, fully realized human being in our way. You are a soul who has a body. In fact, we would often say, we're not humans looking for a spiritual experience. We're spirits having a temporary human experience. You're the one your ancestors were praying for and waiting for through the generations. You've been given a unique set of gifts, and you yourself are a gift to the world. I'll maybe share a brief story to get us started. This was one of my elders. Her name was Betsy Schultz. She passed away almost 20 years ago. And I stumbled into her life and everyone in her family very much by accident. I think I had finished high school with a goal that a lot of high schoolers have, which was I'm going to get out of town and never come back. And I got into Princeton University and I thought, hooray, I've escaped from the brambled racial borderland of my youth. All the dumb people are behind me. I think the first person I met there said, dude, are you native? Where's your tomahawk? And I remember thinking, these are the dumbest smart people I've ever met. The brambled racial borderland will follow me everywhere I go. How naive was I? And I ended up having a great experience at college nonetheless. I was the first person from my tribe to go to that school and one of just half a dozen Native people on campus at the time. I think people from marginalized, minoritized, racialized groups, sometimes we experience hypervisibility. That's racial profiling, things like that. And sometimes we experience invisibility and marginalization. Both things. And it sounds contradictory. It is a paradox, but both things cause different kinds of pain and discomfort. I made my way through Princeton just fine. My freshman year assigned roommate was a Sri Lankan citizen. We were besties and roomed together 4 years in a row and best man at each other's weddings and all that kind of stuff. And so I felt like I always learned as much outside the classroom as in. But by the time I was done, all I wanted to do was come home and never leave. And in the long run, that's kind of what I did. I will shave off a whole bunch of stuff that I went through, but by the time I had finished college, I probably freaked my own parents out. I said, I know I have a great college degree, but I'm not taking a job. I'm not going to graduate school. I'm coming home. I'm going to walk the earth. I'm going to hang out with my elders and spend a little more time with our language and culture. And they said, that sounds beautiful. Good luck paying for that. We're done. And that is what I did. I went looking for Betsy's dad. His name was Archie Mose, and I'll show you a picture of him in a minute. But Archie was really an interesting guy. He was born in 1901. So if he were alive today, he'd be 122. And not only was he born in a wigwam, but all of his kids were born in wigwams. He was 12 years old the first time he ever met a white man. He was in his 30s the first time he met a black man or saw a car. Now, when I went to see him, he was sitting in a modern house watching WWF SmackDown on a TV and laughing really loud. And I was coming to see him about ceremony stuff. And I remember having this really strange experience where, I thought he'd be sitting there, praying for world peace or something instead of watching All-Star Wrestling. But as I came in, he shut off the TV and he said, oh, I've been waiting for you. And I remember thinking, what? How could you be waiting for me? I'm just a kid from a totally different community. You never met me before. But he had a dream. And in his dream, I looked like this person in his dream. And for him, that was enough. And so he just opened the door. I ended up sleeping on his couch. And I was his gopher. Go for this, go for that, drive me here, drive me there, get that drum, get this pipe, And I was just excited to be in the room. It was kind of like, Forrest Gump when he figured out he could run. After that, every time he went somewhere, he was running, and he never thought it would take him anywhere, but it sure did. It kind of felt like that for me, even though, my mother had done a lot to expose me to our language and culture and things like that. I'd just taken it for granted. But now it was a different game for me. And so I ended up having a pretty immersive experience with our language and culture. I remember driving him to the bank. He couldn't even endorse a check. They knew who he was, so they signed his check. But never finished second grade. One of the best educated people I've ever met in my life. I think we often privilege colonial bodies of knowledge and colonial ways of knowing things. And we have, in indigenous communities, more than vestigial remnants of totally different ways of knowing things and different bodies of knowledge. And when we get to questions, I'm happy to take you a little deeper into some of that. But I think it can inform a lot of things. How we look at the world, how we approach solving problems. By the way, the colonial way of solving problems, using violence and taking one language, culture, religion, using it to supplant the others, solving your problems that way creates a whole bunch of other problems. Now, why would we think that all the problems created by the colonial way of solving problems can be solved by the colonial way of solving problems? Right? How silly. This is, in many ways, the problem we are having in America right now. Right? At a time when the majority of the K-12 students in America are students of color, at a time when we need to figure out how to get along and do things together, some people are fighting over who gets to be the oppressor and who has to be the oppressed, instead of working together to fight oppression. Again, violence, supplanting, one culture's going to win, ban those books. Not only will it not work, it will perpetuate the basket of problems that have come from this approach to the world. So in any event, I remember at one point, this would have been later now, 1997, I was driving over to Balsam Lake and Round Lake, these communities where Archie was from. And I remember thinking, I wonder who's going to be speaking at the ceremony, because Archie had passed away a year before. And even when he was in his 90s, he would do all the talking and a lot of the singing. And I remember my first response was like, man, the guy's in his 90s. Why don't they give him a break? But in our way, our word for an elder, gichiaya'a, literally means great being. Our word for an elderly woman, mindumuye, means literally one who holds things together, describes the role of the family matriarch. What do we got in English? Old woman, elderly woman, aged woman, and derogatory words. Hag. How many elders do you see on the cover of Cosmo? Our society is really ageist and really sexist. We keep telling women, your value is to pretend that you're 20 forever. We're pouring money into Botox injections, facelifts, and hair dyes, and no one will admit how old they really are. So it's like the message, sexist and ageist message, is your value is to be sexually attractive to a man. Power, this is just a reinforcement of patriarchy, is getting a man. That's the message. Of course, the message for men is you got to get a bunch of money. And if you have a bunch of it, you'll be super awesome, attractive, and successful, no matter how awful your character. Right? Just in those couple of words from a totally different language, you can get a very different way of looking at the world. You don't have to tell people respect your elders in Ojibwe. It's built in with any word you could possibly use to talk about them. And it shapes things, including centering elders to do public speaking when we have mixed company. Well, he'd passed away. I was driving over there. And Betsy was always really sweet to me. She would kiss me on each cheek and hug me close. She loved the way I loved her dad. And, but she did have this look, which, you know, she's laughing here. She's holding my, my firstborn daughter. But she could give you the mean look, the kind of like mean Indian grandma look, shake her cane, and man, her grandkids would scurry around. But for the first time in my life, she was looking at me like I was one of the grandkids. And she came over and she said, I bet you wonder who's talking today. I said, yeah, who's doing that? She said, well, you are. I said, what? I said, I'm still a kid. I'm not even from here. She said, well, you've been following my dad around all these years. I'm going to find out what you learned. She had a line of people, and they all had tobacco. So in our way, tobacco is not just like pleasure smoking or something like that, but it's considered a sacrifice. Like if you're going to harvest a plant, an animal, ask something of spiritual importance of a fellow human being, it's kind of your pay it forward. So you're not just taking something. And so, of course, it all got colonized like everything else and turned into something full of chemicals that causes us great harm. But the indigenous form of tobacco is really quite different. In any event, she had people lined up with tobacco, and so I had, you know, pouches of it tucked between each of my fingers for all these special requests. People had bowls of food. And she said, my dad never forgot anybody's native name, never forgot what they were asking for, and I'll be listening. So talk about pressure for my first time speaking at a drum ceremony. And I stumbled and bumbled my way through that, pulled it off, glanced at her. She gave me like one nod, and that was that. After that, even to this day, the older I've become, the more I've been called upon to do different kinds of ceremonial service and work. This is, by the way, something that's different for indigenous people. All of us are trying to create or recreate community in any number of different ways, with affinity spaces, work groups, with our families, where we move to. But if you're indigenous, your tether to community is quite different. My relatives have been buried in the same place longer than America's been a country. And it makes it harder to sell a family farm and move to California. By the way, a lot of us have. Half of the enrolled tribal citizenry lives off-res for a whole variety of reasons. We're looking for jobs too. We fall in love with whoever too. You know, the world and life is complicated. But for me, while I could take a job and move somewhere else, move to California, then it would be a lot harder to be at the service of my community quite the same way. And so there's a kind of tether to community that is also quite liberating. The same way that a wedding ring can be a tether, but liberating. And so in any event, as I was getting started with this, and I'll give you a little bit of background on me, and I'll do a little bit, some different stuff with this tonight. I've considered myself a very unlikely candidate to be doing any of the things that I'm doing. These are some pictures of my dad, who was not native at all. My father was an Austrian Jewish immigrant, a Holocaust survivor. He spoke nothing but German the first 13 years of his life. He was still living there for some months after the Anschluss, the German annexation of Austria, chased around by Hitler Youth, his father captured and tortured. And he, and eventually both of his parents and two cousins survived the Holocaust, all in different ways, and everyone else in the family was killed, some 300 family members. He got out at age 13, made it to America at age 14. At age 17, lied about his age, enlisted in the U.S. Army so he could go kill Nazis, and they sent him to the Pacific Theater. He was stationed in the Philippines. Whoops. And I'll give you the short version of his story, which is eventually he made his way to Minnesota, met my mom, and here I am. On my mother's side of the family, too, this is my great-grandmother, who was the last generation in our family where all the kids were hollering at each other in the tribal language, and this was the language from childhood through adulthood for everything in our family. And she had an experience that a lot of us have. This is her daughter, my grandmother, Luella, who actually passed away just about a year ago at the age of 98. And she was taken away from her mom at about age 5, sent to a residential boarding school, forbidden to speak our tribal language, received harsh physical punishments for the speaking of our tribal language, and was raised in institutions. By the way, most of the people in her generation had that experience. It wasn't an isolated event. There was a systemic assault on tribal language and culture. And by the way, it sure flavors even things like our DEI conversations. I think for a lot of Black Americans, education is viewed as an opportunity that for a long time was unfairly denied. And for Native people, education is viewed as oppression. As a result, even though we have some similar data points and demographic issues with regard to test scores, truancy, things like that, there are often different drivers for it. And oftentimes, indigenous voices get marginalized within the DEI discussions that we have. And although there are things like a color line when it comes to, police practices and things like that, there are also distinct contexts and histories that are affecting different groups in very different ways. And it's important that we make space to grow our understanding of all of these different experiences so that we can change them. Well, my grandmother, in spite of being raised in institutions, made her way back to our ancestral village of Bena, population 400. Half of them are my cousins. That's actually not an exaggeration. And she married a local boy, and along came my mom. And my mom grew up in this place with pretty endemic poverty. They pulled all the kids from school when it was wild rice harvesting season or hunting season because all the kids had to help with food production. When my mom was going to school also, she only met one professional Native person ever. That person was the school nurse. And she thought, well, maybe I can do that. Finished high school, went to nursing school. One of her first jobs, she came back to work for our tribe's health program, and she thought, man, Native people are really getting pushed around. I'm going to do something about that. She went back to school, got a law degree, became the first female Native attorney in the state of Minnesota. So when I was growing up, she'd haul me to court, and she'd say, just sit there and don't say anything. And I would sit there and not say anything. And I don't remember the stories or the cases, but I remember this. She was the only woman in court. She was the only Native person in court. And I would walk out of there thinking, you know what? We can do stuff. This is the D part of DEI. It makes such a difference. Role models. What happens when you have the all-male gender equity team? You're missing some vital perspectives, and the optics aren't so good. What happens when you have the all-white racial equity team? Same problem. We need representation. All the different kinds, not tokenized kinds, but empowered kinds of representation for all the things. There's a lot more I could share about her story, and this evening, when I have an event that's kind of more on navigating culture wars and stuff, I'll take you a little deeper into some of that. But as my folks were getting started, that's me as a tyke, you could say they were hitting the restart button. My dad was hitting a restart button in his life, my mother trying to find a pathway out of poverty. We had a house with no electricity, no running water. We had a hand pump. We had an outhouse. We bought a gallon of milk at the store, sunk it in the creek, tied a string on it and sunk it in the creek because it was spring-fed, kept it cool. Wash up in the creek in the summer, enamel wash basins in the winter. I never had food insecurity and never felt poor. I saw big changes, though. There's Archie. And among the changes I saw was my mother getting a law degree. By the time I was in middle school, building a nice house. Economic profile for a family changed. Showed the power of an education. But I think sometimes, as people from communities of color are often messaged, like, we do better and have fewer problems the better we are at whiteness. Check out my academic English. right? You should see the wall in my office. The more of that I can show, right, markers of whiteness, then the easier it is. But at the same time, we'll never be fully accepted, never be fully treated that same way. And so we have to navigate, when does code switching just become assimilation? When does getting along turn into losing ourselves? And especially when you're trying to blend in with a culture whose whole culture is losing yourself, disconnecting from motherland and mother tongue, developing historical amnesia, and saying, everybody's great, everybody's wonderful, everyone's above average, this land is your land, this land is my land, and believing it. Well, I told you a little bit about my journey with Archie. By the way, that's him with the Dalai Lama. We took him to the conference on world religions when it was in Chicago. And it was kind of funny because they looked like they could be related, like brown, bald glasses. But the Dalai Lama wanted to meet Archie because he was the oldest spiritual leader there. And so there were a line of monks coming up, and they were bowing, and Archie had never seen anyone bow before. So he didn't know what to do, so he started patting everybody on the head, saying, that's okay, that's all right. But in the Buddhist tradition, that was taboo. The head's a sacred vessel. And so the Dalai Lama stopped the line. He said, okay, how do you greet? He goes, I don't know. Shake hands. So the Dalai Lama goes like this. He goes, no, like this. So they got an arm wrestler handshake, which I thought was kind of cute. There's my crew, 9 kids. Anybody like kids? I'm always looking for sitters. I think for all of us, and certainly this is the case in the indigenous experience, but I think for all of us, if you go back to just 10,000 years ago, the dawn of the agricultural age, all of us lived in villages. All of us had earth-based worldviews. All of us harvested food together, put the food in a common food cache, and then we took whatever we needed. This is actually what Karl Marx would call primitive communism, from each according to their ability, to each according to their need. Also, we survived all the millennia of cave bears and saber-toothed tigers and whatevers. Not because we outcompeted the people in the next cave. Not because we accumulated more resources than the people in the next cave. We survived those things because the people in the next cave loved us. Today, we emphasize individualism, up by your own bootstraps, hard work, entrepreneurial spirit, save your money. We're so competitive, right? How many sports where nobody wins and nobody loses? Yoga? Probably have a yoga competition soon. You know, how many board games? And there are a couple, but not too many, you know? And because of this emphasis on individualism, competition, and materialism, which, by the way, can serve positive purposes, we sacrifice something. Because in our DNA, we are hardwired to need connection, community, collaboration. And we thrive when we get those things. All of us humans are hungry for that. And our modern social structures leave us often starving. We try to recreate this, maybe in faith communities or other things. But even there, you often have big institutions that are filtering everyone's connection, and big institutions often have their own problems. Money, pedophile priests, whatever. So something that's important to remind people is that connection and culture don't just live outside of us and over the next hill. It lives inside of us. And having a rich cultural life is not just about looking out and looking forward, but it's about looking within, and we can do that wherever we live. And the awakening is healing and empowering. One of my kids, so through different chapters, so the first time, when I became a dad, I said, oh my God, of course it's terrifying being a dad, right? Like you got one shot at raising this kid. The number one goal is do not mess them up, but you don't get any do-overs, right? So being a parent is scary. And I also remember thinking, man, this world has so many problems. How do I protect her? There's no way to protect her from being like othered by others, or the way they're going to treat people because they other others, or any of it, you know? And also, because Uncle Sam's not going to come like walking out of the woods with our language and culture on a silver platter and say, sorry about the last 500 years. How do I make sure she gets any of this stuff? When none of it's valued in a language, in a culture that values individualism, competition, and materialism. So I said, man, that's it. I'm gonna double down. I spoke only Ojibwe to her. I remember she was like 2, waking up. She's crying around for milk in the middle of the night. And I remember thinking, yes, it's working. It's working. I remember when she was about maybe 4, I had to give a keynote address at this language conference. There are lots of Ojibwe speakers, hundreds of them there. And she was literally running in circles around the podium while I'm trying to give my talk. And finally, her little voice picked up on the mic saying, Hingi boogid, meaning I farted. And that was it. Like the whole place erupted into laughter. No one could hear anything I had to say the rest of the day. But they were all talking. Did you hear that little kid? She was speaking Ojibwe. Something's happening. Yeah, we're turning the corner. This is exciting. And so today I'm really excited. She's been part of the team that's been developing Rosetta Stone and Ojibwe books. And here she is transcribing Ojibwe elders and stuff like that. She's a great speaker of Ojibwe. And it was an important reminder to me, but I think to many other people, that we can do something differently. So one of the books, Celine made mention of the Language Warriors Manifesto, which is kind of on point for what I'm going to be sharing with you today about language revitalization and so forth. And it kind of covers these basic things. Like, I realized that a lot of us are trying to figure this stuff out. And it is not easy work. And so I tried to pull together from my experience, and by the way, I'm well-traveled. I've been to all 50 states and a lot of other countries. And the Ojibwe are a group. We've got maybe 600,000 people in the US and another, 250,000 in Canada. And we didn't cross borders. That border crossed us. And we've been trying to navigate 2 different countries and multiple states and provinces with all this different kind of work. But it wasn't just us. Like, the Hawaiians, the Maori, many other different people have had experiments with different kinds of success and different kinds of barriers to the efforts. And I thought it might be helpful to pull all of this together. A lot of people are aware that we're at a time where we're having a bottleneck, like declension of animal species on the planet. And it is scary because it's like we're playing Jenga with Mother Earth. Every time you pull a species out for extinction, it's like pulling a Jenga block out of the tower. And if you pull out too many, you get collapse. And that we are reaching some really dangerous levels with what we're doing to planet Earth. And we're starting to see the effects, right? With changes in weather patterns and things like that. People are often less well aware that we are also at a tipping point with a bottleneck in declension in bodies of knowledge and ways of knowing, especially as embedded in languages. There are about 7,000 languages spoken on planet Earth today. Only 100 are widely taught at colleges and universities. And we're really seeing 4 languages grow dramatically at the expense of many others. By the way, stuff that you wouldn't expect, is happening. Like Sweden is worried about the future of Swedish. And that is a sovereign nation, well-resourced. If somebody publishes a book in Swedish, they buy a copy for every single library in the whole country. You're guaranteed to get thousands of sales just by publishing a book in Swedish. And people are publishing more books in English. And a lot of the business is being conducted in English. And everybody speaks English. And so even there, like where does that take you? Not next year, but like 100 years from now. And it's a question mark. And many, many languages, especially the indigenous ones, are not well resourced. Yes. Right. And so we're seeing some major obstacles. So I kind of was summing up. Let's talk about why this stuff's really important. Let's see what's in the way. I'll share a little bit about my story and a collective one, because there have been some collective ones that have shown us success, and I think we can learn as much from them as anything else. It's hard work. I think most of us humans, we're like water rushing down a mountain. We tend to follow the gorges and paths of least resistance. We follow the roads others have walked before us, sometimes without thinking. Sometimes, we intentionally become a different kind of parent than our parents were. Or we decide to move, but it's still in reaction to their path. And as a result, all that's necessary for most of the languages on planet Earth to die is for us to just do nothing. Keeping them requires us to do something, and often something dramatic. So that means it's hard work. It's uphill. And anybody who wants to do that work, they have to do everything that everybody else is doing anyways. Figure out how to get enough food to eat, take care of their families, have a place to live, right? Other people who don't really get engaged with this stuff, they don't have to worry about that part. They just focus on their own life and their own ambitions. So it's different. I mentioned almost 7,000 languages. 2,500 are severely endangered. In the US, we went from over 500 tribal languages, we're down to 130. Only 20 of those are spoken by kids. Only 4 of those have so many speakers, they'll definitely be here 100 years from now. And this is just, I'm going to go move fast through that because it's just data on some areas that are kind of outside of your region that might have less meaning for you. Some people say things like language learning has to start at home. But if it has to start at home, it'll kind of never start. We have to do other things. By the way, the biggest predictor for the language that a child will speak is not the language of their parents. It is not the language of their teacher. It is the language of their peers. So this often happens with immigrants from non-English speaking countries who come to America, is they're speaking the heritage language at home. So mom, dad, kids, they all speak that heritage language. But the kids start going to school. And when they go to school, they're operating in English. And then when they grow up, they're often even marrying people who don't even speak that heritage language. And the language of the home starts switching to English, and they'll code switch back to the heritage language to talk to grandma. And it's just 2 generations, and you break down the language in a family. Right? There are many exceptions, and there are many valiant efforts to keep heritage languages alive, But frankly, even the Amish have a really hard time going Amish. They're losing people all the time. They got to pay taxes and deal with America like everybody else. Right? And that's a group that's also well-resourced with land that can try to wall themselves off. Right? As soon as you got a satellite dish or a internet service in a remote fly-in native community in Canada, kids are watching SpongeBob in English. You don't even need residential boarding schools to do the work. So we're seeing the proliferation of languages. We're seeing it in places like America, English-only laws. We're seeing, lack of funding and resources. Educational medium, we're still all about colonization in this country. We really are. This is what people mean when they talk about things like white privilege. It's not financial advantage. It's the privilege of going to school and having your race widely represented in who's teaching. It's the privilege of going to school and having your race widely represented in stories of who made America a great place. It's the privilege of going to school and having your language supported. Things like that. We have internal issues, lack of awareness, involvement, commitment, internalized and lateral oppression dynamics. You know what I mean by those words? You could read Paulo Freire, Pedagogy of the Oppressed. I felt like I needed a thesaurus and a bottle of aspirin to get through that book, but he is a mad genius. And among the things he says in there, and this is kind of helpful, is that, you know, when you look at, and just for the sake of irony, we'll take the example of the Pilgrims. Back in England, persecuted for their religious beliefs. What did they do? They got into boats. They came across the ocean. There was literally an ocean that divided them from their oppressor. Was that the end of oppression? No. Where was it? They carried it inside of themselves when they hopped into boats, right? They got to New England, and what did they do? Internalized oppression, blame and shame stuff in the Puritan culture. They started beating up on their own folks, Salem witch trials and all kinds of crazy stuff. They started beating up on natives. They started beating up on black folk, you know, and like the oppression kept on going. So Freire would say there are 4 pillars that hold up oppression. Only one of them is the external actor that's keeping us down, the man. 3 of them are happening inside of the oppressed community. Internalized oppression, lateral oppression, and intra-oppressed group oppression. Right? By the way, 4 pillars hold it up. All of those things, internalized oppression, negative self-talk, for a Native community, high suicide rate, substance abuse, lateral oppression, being mean to each other, crabs in the bucket, that kind of stuff. Intra-oppressed group oppression, homophobia, anti-black, whatever, in any place. And so all of those things support white supremacy. Also, 3 out of 4 things are happening inside of communities that we actually have some say and control over. So while our instinct is to say the external oppressor needs to be taken down, we also have to tend to the things in our own house. That doesn't mean that's the only work. It just means that's the work we have the greatest say over. Of course, we need to tend to that one too. I was talking to some folks at Seminole Nation. They are one of the tribes that has been absolutely successful. They a huge gaming tribe. They own the Hard Rock Cafe enterprise. They operate businesses internationally, and they eliminated poverty for all of their citizens. By the way, they are the exception, not the rule. And there are only a couple of tribes that have been able to do that. Mashantucket Pequot, Shakopee, Mdewakanton Sioux community, and Seminole Nation in Florida. And in fact, there's still disproportionate poverty and all kinds of other issues. The economic landscape for Native people is complex. It is not simple. But the tribal chairman for Seminole Nation in Florida said, seems like Florida has a big budget shortfall in education. One year they wrote him a check and covered the whole gap. Millions of dollars. Governor of Florida's like, thank you, Mr. Chairman, sir. There will be no state proliferation of gaming here in Florida, sir. I'm going to take your ideas, I'm going to put them on the top of my agenda, and I'm going to bring them with me when I go to the governor's conference with the President of the United States, sir. So I was asking him, well, what keeps you guys up at night? And every Seminole person I've ever talked to says, language and culture loss. In some ways, I see us climbing these mountains, and they are the mountains of economic prosperity, political empowerment, sovereignty. These mountains matter. But I'm concerned that they'll climb to the top, look around, and say, oh my God, we climbed the wrong mountain. We should have been working on our language, our culture, the things that distinguish us from everyone else, while we had the chance. It doesn't mean that all those other things aren't important. Indeed, they are. We have to tend to health, and we have to tend to financial health and all these different things, but not to the expense and exclusion of everything else. And oftentimes, this is one of the dilemmas with language revitalization, is that a marginalized community has to worry about the fact that our life expectancy stops before retirement. Like, it seems like a luxury to work on something like language revitalization, you know? But we can't afford not to. And by the way, there's a direct connection between those things and positive mental health, physical health, and everything else. So I think it's also important just to realize our people have been through a lot. It's beyond the scope for today, you know, to take a deep dive into, you know, historical trauma and things like that, but it's definitely worth the time to seek a better understanding of that. So we got to remember that, you know, our people have been through a lot. And by the way, I'm not just talking about indigenous people, like people have been through a lot. And we're kind of right where we should be, having been through the things that we've been through and continue to go through. And so we need to take it easy on each other at the same time that we have high standards and work hard to make things different. Oh yeah, there's Paulo Freire. The Hawaiians are pretty dang cool. They, 30 years ago, their language was illegal for use in public schools. Today, it's one of the official languages for the whole state of Hawaii. They were down to 1,000 speakers, half of whom lived in one isolated island community, Niihau, and the other half were all elders over 70. Today, there are 24,000 speakers. 3,000 have learned it as their first language in the home. There are 22 Hawaiian medium schools where you can go to school and Hawaiian is the language of instruction. You can even get a college degree with Hawaiian as the language of instruction. It's pretty remarkable. And there's a lot to say about what they do and how they go about doing it, and we can learn a lot from that. They do things like line up the whole staff in front of the school every day, and then here come the kids piling off of buses, straggling parents. They have to line up, and the kids do what these ones are doing, sing, asking for permission to come in the school in the Polynesian tradition. And when the staff feels they're sincere, they sing back, and then every kid gets a hug from every person who works at the school every single day. Aloha. Which means hello, goodbye, and I love you. Now, in the mainstream, we'd be thinking, are you serious? 45 minutes on cultural enrichment at the start of every day. The kids are awake in the morning. Make them do math. Until you realize that Navajo here has a 100% graduation rate. They have no statistically significant truancy problem. Oh my God. No one has better data than that. If somebody's figuring something out, we need to pay more attention to that. By the way, like, there's a lot, and I could rant a lot about education policy in America, but if you look at the top performing states in America with aggregate test scores, they are North Dakota, Minnesota, Iowa, Wisconsin, Michigan. Is there a pattern here? Yes. And you want to look at the states that have the worst racially predictable disparities in education? They're the same states. How can that be? And it's like, the whiter the state, the whiter the curriculum, the whiter the body of teachers, the better the white students are doing, and the worse everyone else is doing. But we can't engineer education that's like a white empowerment program. Makes everybody cringe to say the words. We have to be able to teach everybody about who they are. Empower everybody for exactly who they are. And also educate everybody for who's going to be in their world going forward. Question? Go right ahead.
That balance between profit, you know, and the public good. You know, the public good is only going to get you so far. Like, how do you speak that language and get to where Hawaii was?
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Yeah, well, there's no simple, easy answer on this stuff, but at the same time, I do think it's helpful to try to speak their language. You know, like I'm telling folks at my university, look, the stock market goes like this, ups and downs, but generally trends up. Half of the Fortune 500 companies in 1980 don't even exist today. They are bankrupt and gone. But the stock market's up here. In higher education, right now, some of the institutions here, they will not be here. Right? So as a business plan, you have to be aware that the majority of the K-12 students in America are students of color. If you do not have an offering that is palatable and desirable for them, you will see declining enrollments. And then when you have declining enrollments, you can only make up for it so much by hiking up tuition. And then you're going to have further declining enrollments unless you have really dramatic, you know, scholarship support like Princeton. If you're not heading there, you're going down. As a business plan, you need to have offerings that will be desirable for the students of America. And by the way, it is not just a service of charity for the poor and disenfranchised. It's a good business plan. And critically needed for all the white kids in America who have for too long been prepared for some fantasy land that will never exist instead of the world they'll actually live in and operate in, which is a place we can only imagine but must imagine will be a diverse place. We shortchange them so much by teaching only patriotism and whiteness, you know? We got to figure out how to get along. We have to learn about each other. And it does not teach anyone to hate America. It does not diminish the greatness of our nation. In fact, if somebody does something wrong and they say, oh my God, I did something wrong. I'm so sorry. We're going to make a new chapter together. It's easier to believe them than if they say, I never did anything wrong. You know? It's like the dude who cheats on his wife and is like, forget about it, it all happened in the past. We're only going forward from here. Like, how's that going to work? You know?
Talking about offerings that are desirable for people. Talking about offerings in universities that are desirable for students. Like, for example, we don't have offerings in native languages, in languages that are spoken in this geographic region. And I know that there is a lot of wonderful languages, such as the Miami, language revival, all of the wonderful work that you guys are doing here. And I teach linguistics. In my intro to linguistics, I try to bring some of these languages. And students says, why is it that we are not getting these languages offered in our universities? So, so question to you. If, of course, hopefully the universities could bring some of those offerings because there is an interest in learning some of the native languages from here on the part of the students. Could we hire someone to teach these languages? Do you guys have people who will be interested in coming to Louisville, let's say, to teach Ojibwe in this case?
Oh yeah, it's easy for an institution to say, we don't have anybody to teach that, we don't have any money for that, and we'll never get students who want to take that. But you have to build it so they'll come. And in this day and age, like my classes right now are taught high flex. I've got students in person and by Zoom. It's synchronous, and I've got students in about 12 states taking my classes, right? There are lots of ways we can make better use of new technology to render things more available. And ultimately, the places that figure out how to build stuff are the ones that will have people who come. It's really that simple. And I think there's a growing awareness that even if your only goal is to be financially successful and run the best, quarterly shareholder statement. That if you want to do business in China, you better have somebody who speaks Chinese, right? And that when you look at tribes in America, the gross economic output for tribes is $147 billion per year. Do you want our business or not? And as people start to realize that sort of stuff, they're like, oh my God, and they're just starting to see it. Honestly, it took a movie like Black Panther for Hollywood to say, oh, I guess we don't have to have white lead characters to have a movie be a financial box office success. Okay, let's try some other ones. They're just starting to see. But there's a lot more to see. I'm mindful that we're going to have to move along with the agenda. Maybe I'll just see what else I got here for you. We got bilingual signage efforts going in our tribal language. We put it on the cop cars. Check that out. Gunawanjagang, Minawa, Nadamagang, the protected serve. There are all kinds of things we can do. That says a lot. If you're curious about more what's happening with our particular tribe, you can check out that free video. It's got a YouTube or Vimeo link. These are some of our elders, Jedi Council in Mille Lacs. In that particular community, there are only 25 speakers left. I got called to one of the craziest meetings of my life. They said, you got to come down here. We got some money left over from grants. We want to do something with language, and we need some ideas. And I said, okay, I'll come down there. How much money are we talking about? Well, it's about $14 million. Almost spit my teeth out. I said, look, you got 25 speakers. They're not going to be able to do everything all by themselves. So we got to set them up in different ways. So we developed Rosetta Stone for Ojibwe. And year one's out, year two comes out next month, and then another year every year for the next 6 years. Doing books for the kids and stuff like that, all in the language. And this elder on the end, we had to teach elders how to work through the pandemic, but this guy, Joe Nekwanebi, his brother died from COVID, his sister died from COVID. We had the book launch event, and I thought he'd get up there and say, this is the hardest time of our lives. And he said, we've been through a lot, but seeing all these young people coming around, seeing what we've been able to build, knowing that our elders are going to be teaching people our language for hundreds of years to come, working on this has been the happiest time of my life. It was a powerful statement. And it's a reminder that we all receive healing in the giving. That the receiving is often in the giving. And I think this is something that Western culture doesn't teach very well. That the receiving is in the taking, and in the building, and in the more, and in the out-competing. I like the Carl Jung quote, the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there's any reaction, both are transformed. I'll wrap it up with one final story. This is the view of our family property. I kind of feel like Shrek. That's my swamp. But among things that had happened is my folks acquired this property kind of early in their journey, and it did not look like that. It looked like that. That's my dad on the tractor with my brother here. And they started planting trees. They planted all of the trees in that picture right there. Completely transformed the whole landscape and the ecosystem. Just a couple of people. Granted, they had a child labor force. But what a change. I think oftentimes we look around at climate change, race relations, politics, language loss, whatever. And we start thinking, man, there's not much I can do about that. Try to be decent human, tell my kids to be decent people, and hope it's enough, and it's never quite enough. Because all that's necessary for evil to triumph is good people to do nothing or too little. But it's not like we need to take this mountain of problems that humans have been making for thousands of years and move that mountain right now. It's more like we need to keep planting the seeds, and it can transform everything. That's what we do. When we teach somebody a word, when we successfully stabilize or revitalize a language like Hawaiian, when we educate someone, when we have a conversation in mixed company, every one of those things is an opportunity to plant the seeds. So we all have some work to do. But I believe in the work. I believe in you. Thanks for coming out today. Miigwech.
Dr. Bennett.
My question is, and thank you so much for the presentation. My brain was, and heart was everywhere. And it's very conflicting because I was trained as an English as a second language teacher. And during the coursework, I was like, I don't know. I have mixed feelings about this training. But what emerging scholarship that excites you? Like if your wife was here, she knows, like, oh my goodness, he's gonna go in this direction. But what is exciting you about indigenous futures? That one phrase, and you see a lot is growing in the scholarship. So that's my question. What do you see, and you see that is growing and has great possibilities that we definitely may not know?
Yes, it's a great question. I do have a lot of hope. I really do. And I've seen remarkable positive change on multiple fronts. In 1969, 57% of the native population was below the poverty line. 57%. Now, we're at 27%. Now, 27% is an unacceptable level, but that is one of the most dramatic financial improvements for any segment of the population during that time. We've lost many languages, or they're just gone. We still have an epidemic of substance abuse, high suicide rate. All these things are very real. But I'm seeing for the first time that we are really starting to exercise our sovereignty, like manifest sovereignty. It's what we make of it. No one is going to help us, pull us out of poverty. We had to do all that ourselves. There was no program, no anti-poverty initiative for natives in this country, nothing. Just like the black community never got their 40 acres and a mule. Like it's just, there's no way around the unfairness of it all. We have to make our own luck, you know? Now, in terms of scholarship, there are lots of great voices that are speaking to how do we move to a more liberated state, the internal work, as well as moving the external things, which might seem a lot more frustrating, like how do we change American policy or practice, you know? Because we just keep reinventing racial caste in this country rather than doing away with it, you know? But I do have hope, and I do see shifts and changes. With the indigenous stuff, you know, I'm seeing efforts more recently in land back, you know, in nationhood and sovereignty. All of these things are under assault. There are cases before the Supreme Court right now on Indian Child Welfare Act and other things that could do great damage to tribal sovereignty. So I'm not ignorant of those things. But I do believe that we are developing collaboration and capacity. And I think, you know, that King was right when he says the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward justice.
So with that, if I may interject as well, I will say, so to give Dr. Treuer a little break, and also a moment for us to get you all fed. I want to invite you all to please pull out your phones and please fill this out. And this is a survey, right? You are going to let us know what we could have done better, what went well for you. But I want to invite you to think of this also. There's some questions in there, right, as a moment of reflection for yourself. What are some things that you found eye-opening, right? As Dr. Treuer has mentioned to us, right, in the thing of there's the gift in receiving, right? You've been receiving his knowledge, his wisdom for the past hour, right? So I invite you to sit with the things and really take this as a moment of reflection as well, right? And so, and then after that, we'll have some lunch. You all can continue to have some dialogue here with Dr. Treuer, and we also have some items that we're going to raffle. Sorry.
Nice.
Yes. Let me know if you have issues getting to this too. Oh, or is it? Because you got two sides. I'm guessing they put the other one in here. Yeah. Yeah. And your food's in the conference room.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So as you all are finishing up that, let's do this raffle. We're gonna have, well, wait, we'll give it a few more, 1 or 2 more minutes. Hold on. And I still see people typing. Okay. Okay. All right. So as you all finish that up, if everybody could pull out their tickets, please. And these are Dr. Treuer's few of the books that he's wrote and authored. So the first one, the Cultural Toolbox. You want to talk about any little, I don't know, any highlights of this?
I love this book. No, you might have a little sense of it. I mentioned a couple quotes from it during the presentation. So this is kind of about cultural practices and how our family tries to live those in this crazy modern world.
And so the numbers are 414055. Who this? Right there.
Uh-huh.
Yes, here you are.
Come on down.
Wonderful. All right. Okay, on to the next one. Next one, the Language Warriors Manifesto. Right here. Any words?
You had mentioned of this one too, so this gives you a sense for some of what's happening in the language revitalization universe. It's got personal stories, but also lots of wisdom from around indigenous spaces.
Lovely. The last three are 065. 065. 41. It's you? Cool. Oh, here you go. There you go. You got take it. Thank you. Cool. Congrats. And the last one, everything you wanted to know about Indians, but were afraid to ask.
We're going to be getting into this one a little bit this evening, some questions and answers. So this covers everything, broad range of topics, mascots, pipelines, education policy, sovereignty, economics, terminology.
We're going to have Beto pick this one out. What the last three? All right, yeah, what they be? This is it. All right, last three, 058. 058. Yeah. Well, if we could pass this. Oh, there you go. Cool. All right. Thank you, Beto. All right. And so with that, you all are please welcome to the food here. We have Mayan Cafe.
If you want a book, I'm happy to sign them up.
Yeah. Oh, there you go. Also, we will be raffling more of these three copies at the next events too. So we got a Mayan Cafe though, veggie, chicken, and beef. And also before things end, I want to give a big shout out to all the people who helped make this possible. We have the Filson Historical Society here. We have the library here. We have number of partners.
Arts and Sciences, that College of Business, the Kent School is in the house for sure. Libraries, if I didn't said them, athletics, CODRA, and the College of Education Diversity Committee. I think that's what it's called. So everyone that is up here, very honors as well. So again, but if you did RSVP before yesterday, you definitely have the first come, first serve. If you RSVP before today for food, you know who you are. If there are leftovers, then everyone else can get them. But yes, join us today. So we still have some openings for our 3 p.m. So we will do a small group kind of facilitation. So we'll kind of rearrange the room a little bit. So I know some of you RSVP'd for later, so definitely join us. Our 6 p.m. is in the College of Education, is in the College of Business. And for the people joining us online, 6 p.m. in person, also will be streaming online as well. Thank you for joining us online. Goodbye to our online crew. Everybody else in the room, 3 p.m. here, 6 p.m. in the College of Business.